The name of the Siforno that the people that were chosen were not ordinary people. Not only were the tzaddikim, as the Torah refers to them as anoshim, but they were heads of the tribes. And Hashem handpicked every one of them by name, and he explains that when the Nisim, when the Meraglim had come back with the ominous reports, there was no argument in terms of the actual physical facts. What they saw giants, they saw people dying and people burying the dead wherever they turned. The fruits they brought back were of abnormal dimension. As we will read, you needed a few people to carry just a cluster of grapes. So in terms of their integrity, there wasn't a question. They wouldn't have falsified the facts. The facts were accurate. The discussion is, what was the interpretation of those facts? How did they read what they had seen? Did you read it as the 10 of the Meraglim read those facts? Or was it read the way Calev and Yehoshua read those, what they had seen? But if they would have sent people of lesser dimension, if they would have had reason not to want to go, for whatever reason may be, they will falsify the facts, they'll exaggerate them, they would not report accurately. And later, when it comes to light, what actually happened, if we have the facts on the page, and it's only a question of how to read it, they will realize afterwards that they had read the scenario wrong. They didn't have an understanding of the landscape. It was a misunderstanding of the landscape. But if they're arguing what the landscape was, it's even later when they will be punished based on the facts because they're not accurate or they were falsified, there will never be a moment of truth. So Hashem chose specifically these people who are of integrity, of dimension, that what they report will be accurate. And so later, when it will come to light what actually happened, truth will be established. That's a Siforno. So that's why these people who were chosen, they were Nisim, and God chose these people. The Torah tells us or at the Pasuk 16, these are the names of the men that Moshe had sent to scout out the land. Vayikra Moshe Hoshea ben Yehoshua. And Moshe called Hoshea, who was his disciple, his closest disciple, Yehoshua. He added a yud to his name. So Rashi, famous Chazal, Tezayin, Vayikra Moshe Hoshea, Hispalel Olov. Moshe prayed for Yehoshua. Ko Yoshiacho me'atzas Meraglim. God should save you from the plottings of these spies, that he should not be influenced from the 10. We'll see later, we find that when they were in Canaan, Calev, who represented the tribe of Yehuda, who was of the same position as Yehoshua, he had gone and he prostrated himself on Kivrei Yavos. He went to Hebron to pray on the graves of Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, that he should not be influenced by the machinations and the plotting of the Meraglim. Hashem should assist him, that he should not see it as they're seeing it. So from that we see that how to read the script, how to process it, it's not so simple. There's a very strong reason to see it as the 10 saw it. He needed special siyata d'shmaya, special divine intervention, Calev, And he prayed at the graves of the Avos HaKadoshim that Hashem should give him special assistance to see it as it is. And he was not influenced. So we understand it wasn't a simple challenge. Moshe in advance understood this. He understood all sides of the equation. And even as great as Yehoshua was, he prayed for him. He added the Yud, which represents Kod, the name of Hashem, Yoshiacho Me'atzas Meraglim. Should protect you from the plottings of the Meraglim. It's clear. Calev had to pray. If Calev saw it straight initially, what do you have to pray for? As we'll see in a moment. And if you see you're, as we call, a straight shooter, and you don't have those conflicts of the others, why did Moshe have to add the Yud to Yeshua's name, that he should be protected from the Atzas Meraglim? This is an obvious question. So there's a famous word from the Chofetz Chaim that Yehoshua and Calev had two different types of personalities. Different personalities. Yehoshua was the disciple of Moshe in every sense of the word. As it says, even at the time of the Chet Egel, when it was happening, where was Yehoshua? He was at the foot of the mountain waiting for his Rebbe to return. And when he did return, Yehoshua says to his Rebbe, to Moshe Rabbeinu, I hear all kinds of sounds coming from the machne, from the camp. Is it sounds of victory? Is it sounds of defeat? So Moshe says, it's neither. It sounds of blasphemy. That's those sounds. Yehoshua had no idea. He wasn't there. And then he goes with his Rebbe, and his Rebbe is carrying the first set of luchos, and he sees what's going on. He smashes the luchos at the foot of the mountain. Yehoshua, as the Gemara tells us, was K'mei HaLevana. Moshe is K'mei HaChama. Yehoshua is K'mei HaLevana. The sun generates its own light. The moon is a reflection of the sun. Yehoshua versus his Rebbe, Moshe Rabbeinu, he reflected every aspect of Moshe. Just as the sun is the source of, and the intensity of light is at a different level, but the moon reflects that light. Yehoshua reflected everything that his Rebbe was. The Gemara tells us in Sanhedrin that a judge, when he adjudicates between two parties, if he's able to mediate rather than give a verdict of innocent guilty, mitzvah lasas pshara. There's a mitzvah to do a pshara, meaning to try to work out a compromise. One gives a little, one takes a little. Why? Because then when people walk away, both of them walk away satisfied, neither feels victimized. So the Gemara tells us that Aaron his approach was to do pshara, to mediate between the two parties. Aaron was Oev Shalom, V'rodiv Shalom. He loved peace, he pursued peace. So how do you achieve that? Through mediation. On the other hand, Moshe Rabbeinu, his approach was Yaakov Hadin Esahor. That the din, the law, if the mountain is in contradiction to the din pierces the mountain. If you have to uproot the mountain, you have to uproot the mountain. Nothing stands in the place of din, of absolute justice. So I ask the question, if the right way to go is there's mitzvah lasas pshara, there's a mitzvah to try to work out a compromise, to mediate between two parties, so why didn't Moshe Rabbeinu, why didn't he embrace this approach, what we call pshara, mediation? Why did Moshe was direct? Let the din pierce the mountain. So we'd explained in the past, what does Moshe Rabbeinu represent? And we see from his behavior from the very beginning, Moshe Rabbeinu, he himself, his persona, every aspect of that was emes, truth, unadulterated truth. He represents Torah, which is emes kanev al tibkor, truth on the absolute level. That's why Moshe Rabbeinu was the conduit for the Torah to be transmitted through him, we find that when he saw the Dosan Aviram fighting between the two of them, when he came out of the palace, what did he say? Rosha Lavasakis Reyecho. Evil one, why are you striking your friend? And what did they say to him? Do you mean to say you're going to kill us also, as you killed the Egyptian? Now, Moshe comes out of the palace. He understands who he is. He's the only advocate for the Jews. He sees an Egyptian taskmaster beating a Jew. He kills him. But don't you realize there can be terrible consequences? There's a chance somebody may see and somebody may inform on you. And you're going to have to flee Egypt. And you may not even be able to flee Egypt because you may be killed. Which miracles happened why he was not killed and why he was able to flee. But it was not part of his basis for his decision. If a man goes and rapes a woman's wife, then he beats him because he realized what happened. This is unacceptable. So what does justice demand? Justice has to be delivered. He killed the Egyptian. You don't take anything into consideration other than delivering justice. That was Moshe Rabbeinu. Moshe Rabbeinu was emes. He personified emes, truth. He flees Egypt. He goes to Midian. And he sees a number of women shepherdesses. And they take their flocks to water them. All of a sudden they're attacked by male shepherds. He immediately goes to their defense. He fights them off. He waters the flocks. Moshe Rabbeinu was a fugitive. Paro's tentacles went all over the world, wherever there were communities. Keep a low profile. By doing this public act, word could get back to Egypt, to Paro, and they'll know exactly who you are. It wasn't part of the equation. Emes demanded he has to intervene, regardless of what the consequences will be, what the ramifications may be. So Moshe was emes. Emes says, even though take the parties into account, you may satisfy both of them, but since Moshe Rabbeinu represents truth, which is Torah, Torah cannot be compromised. And you don't encourage it in terms of where you're coming from. Yehoshua, being disciple of Moshe Rabbeinu, also had this persona of emes. And that's Pnei Yehoshua, Pnei Levana. Yeshua's representation was he's a reflection of his Rebbe. His Rebbe was the sun, and he was a reflection of that light. Just give you a background to be able to appreciate the Chofetz Chaim. So the Chofetz Chaim explains, Yeshua had a different personality. When Yeshua will see and understand the plottings of the 10, that they're trying to create a setting to back their position, to secure their position, bringing back the fruits of abnormal dimension, to explain and secure their position, that just as the fruits are abnormal and the people there are abnormal, you can only survive that environment if you have that other dimension of person. But if you're ordinary people like ourselves, it's a death trap. That was the value of bringing back those fruits. Yehoshua would protest it. When he realizes what's going on, he'll openly, vocally protest it. You know what it will be? He could be killed. They will kill him. Because he is putting everything into jeopardy. Therefore, Moshe Rabbeinu, understanding this, had to add the yud to his name, Kol Yosheach Hashem. Hashem should come to your salvation, to your aid, that you should not be harmed by them. Calev, on the other hand, had a different personality. What was Calev? We find that when Calev came back and they presented their case against Moshe Rabbeinu, it says Calev stood on a chair, like on a pedestal, and he announced to the people, he says, is that all that Moshe Rabbeinu had done for us? What did he do to us? And immediately he says, he split the sea, he split the rock, brought the manna, so on and so forth. So until that point, if they understood that Calev did not side with them, the 10, they would have hushed him. They wouldn't have allowed him to speak. But Calev was able to get his word edgewise into this conversation, only because until that moment, they did not realize who Calev was. Calev was able to keep under wraps exactly his position. When a person goes and plays the game, and you're not in an opposition mode continuously, there's a certain level of subliminal influence that Calev could be influenced. And Calev realized that. Calev had to keep himself, he couldn't reveal who he was. And he had to play the game that he's one of the 10. He's the 11th. Yehoshua is the only one who's opposing them. When you're in that position, you realize as much as whatever your objective is, you'll be influenced. And Calev felt because he wasn't continuously opposing them, openly, vociferously opposing them, he was being drawn into them to start seeing it as they were seeing it. Therefore, he had to go to the Kivri Ovos, to the graves of Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov to pray for divine assistance, that despite the fact that under normal circumstances you would be influenced, he should not be influenced. That's why Moshe had to add the Yud to Yehoshua, and he did not have to pray for Calev, because it was a question of physical danger. Yehoshua would be killed, Calev he wasn't concerned would be killed. And Calev would go and pray for divine assistance to have clarity that he should not be drawn into this cabal of these people of the 10 that they're trying to bring this about. That's how the Chofetz Chaim explains it. Why Yehoshua had to have the Yud added to his name, Ko Yeshua Achem, and Calev did not for that reason. But one thing we see, that it's not so simple. You know, if you hear something long enough, ultimately you never know how you can be influenced. You can be influenced. There's a famous story about the Chofetz Chaim. You know, to say on a Jew, Yimach Shmo v'Zichro, it's a strong statement. The only time I ever saw in the Rambam in his commentary on Pirkei Avos writes, as we find in the Gemara, they were Tzedukim and Prushim. They were the Sadducees and the Pharisees. The Tzedukim opposed the Torah Baal Peh, and the whole story with Alexander the Great, where they had gone and told Alexander the Great, who had conquered the world already, and he was coming with his armies to destroy the Beis Hamikdash. So they had gone and said to Alexander the Great, he says, you know what those Jews do in that temple? They pray for your destruction. And Alexander the Great, for him to wipe out a nation meant nothing. And when he hears this, he's infuriated. And he's coming with his generals, they're galloping towards Yerushalayim, and he's going to destroy the Beis Hamikdash of Yerushalayim. Shimon HaTzadik was the high priest at the time, and he realized what was happening. So he went in his priestly vestments with all the other Kohanim, with torches. They had left Yerushalayim, and they marched towards the camp of Alexander the Great, known as Alexander the Macedonian. In Hebrew, is referred to in the Gemara as Alexander Mukdon. That's Alexander the Macedonian. And he's wearing the Shmona Begodim, he's wearing the 8 vestments, and the other Kohanim were wearing their vestments, and they're carrying torches, and they come to the camp, and Alexander the Great sees Shimon HaTzadik, and he's on his horse. When he sees Shimon HaTzadik, he dismounts, and he goes, and he prostrates himself. Could you imagine? This man is a bloodthirsty, life means nothing, nations mean nothing, and he goes and he humbles himself, prostrates himself before Shimon HaTzadik, and he kisses the hem of the robes of Shimon HaTzadik. His generals see this. They don't believe what they see before their eyes. This powerful man, where the whole world trembles in his presence, he should be so humble before this Jew. So he says to his generals, I want to explain to you who this man is. Every time I go to battle, before I go into battle, I have a dream. And in that dream, I see this man in his vestments to exactly what he looks now. And that to me is an indication of victory. So whenever this man comes to me in a dream, I know I will be victorious. So to accept for a moment that this man is praying for our destruction, it's impossible. So what did he do? He went and took the Sadducees and he tied them to horses, tied them, bound their hands and feet, and he had them dragged throughout the countryside over rubble, over stones, until they died. That's how he had them killed. That's the story of Shimon HaTzadik. So, just lost my train of thought for a minute. I'm telling you the story about Alexander the Great. I was telling you something about the Chofetz Chaim. Yes. So, the Chofetz Chaim, in the time of the Rambam lived in Egypt, there was a sect of Jews called the Karaites. The Karaites were the equivalent of the Tzaddukim, of the Sadducees. And they made all kinds of trouble for the religious community. And the Karaites were exactly like the Tzaddukim. You know, they would sit in the dark on Shabbos. They would eat cold food. Because they interpreted the Torah exactly, literally, as the Psukim say. They rejected the oral law. And they would inform to the Sultan on the Jews, and they put the Jewish community in jeopardy continuously. So when the Rambam refers to the Karoim, they refer to Karoim or Karaites, he says, Yimach Shmam v'Zichron. To say on a Jew, Yimach Shmam v'Zichron, the names and the memory should be obliterated is a pretty strong statement. That's how we refer to them. So the Chofetz Chaim, as a child, was an orphan. As a young boy, he was an orphan. But he had a photographic memory. He was a genius. And there was a group of young boys between the age of 8 and 10, which were all similar. And they would sit and study in a shul in Vilna. And they would study Gemara, and they would memorize the Gemara. And they would play all kinds of games when they studied the Gemara. They would read it by heart, horizontally, vertically, diagonally, every other word. And between themselves, they would have all kinds of contexts, exactly to what degree were they able to memorize the Gemara. And they were all geniuses, these little boys. And there was a Jew, his name was Adam Cohn. And he saw this group of boys, and he noticed the potential of the Chofetz Chaim. That he could be, and this Adam Cohn was the founder of the Enlightenment movement in Vilna. He actually headed the Enlightenment movement with Haskalah, and he was looking for child prodigies that ultimately could assume positions in the movement, in the Enlightenment movement. And he felt the Chofetz Chaim, this little boy, that if he mentors him, he'll be a star. He'll be one of the leaders of the Enlightenment movement. And every day, he would go to the Chofetz Chaim, his name was Yisrael Me'ah Cohen, speak to him softly, gently, and he was a very intelligent man, this man Cohen. And he tried to seduce him and bring him into the position, not even realizing he's victimizing this little boy, as much as he was a genius, but he saw the potential. There's a water carrier who was in Vilna, poor man, and he saw what was going on. An ordinary, simple, observant water carrier. And he goes over to the Chofetz Chaim, to this boy, Yisrael Me'ah Cohen, and he says, I want to explain you something. This man who speaks to you every day, he's evil. You have to stay away from him. And he will be unrelenting. If he knows where you are, he'll come after you. And he's so glib-lipped, he will influence you and seduce you. And you're gonna come under his spell. What you have to do is you have to flee from Vilna. And you have to flee to go to some kind of village outside of Vilna and go into hiding. He should not know where you are. Because if he knows where you are, he will seek you out and he will influence you. This is what the water carrier tells the Chofetz Chaim. And the Chofetz Chaim succeeded. And later he realized exactly who this man was, this Adam Cohen. So every Purim, at the Chofetz Chaim's Purim Suda, he would tell over the story of this Adam Cohen attempting to seduce him, to influence him, and how the water carrier saved his life, saved his spiritual life. And he would give a bracha to this water carrier because he owes everything he is to that water carrier. And when he would mention the name of Adam Cohen, he would say, Yimach Shmo v'Zichro. His name should be obliterated and memory forever. That's what he would say on this Odom Kohn. That's the story of the Chofetz Chaim. So what is seduction? Calev, unless you're openly opposed, understanding who they are, like Yehoshua was, you don't have to worry about Yehoshua being influenced, but you have to be concerned he'll be killed. However, Calev, who was the politician par excellence, he knew how to play the game of diplomacy. So he's under wraps. So he has to assume a persona similar to they are, not being in opposition mode, you can easily be influenced, subliminally be influenced. Therefore, Calev had to go to the Kivrei Ovis to be mispalel, to pray that he should not be influenced. And therefore, until the very end, the other 10 did not know who Calev was. And therefore, he was able to stand up and openly oppose them and say his piece, his position. And therefore, later it says, Calev, the reason why Hashem says, I owe special thanks to Calev, because of his statement publicly, he actually stated, he created a public Kiddush Hashem. But what he did, although he knew exactly, he was in jeopardy continuously due to be influenced, but he did not take that into consideration for the sake of Kiddush Hashem. That's the Chofetz Chaim.